When has a parent come crawling back for help after destroying your life? I lived with my single mother since I was 14. My parents divorced after years of fights and arguments that I soon became accustomed to. It got to the point that I thought all families were like this. After the divorce, my father moved away to France and from what I heard, started a new life and family over there. I on the other hand, stayed with my mother who remarried again, this time to a rich and successful businessman with 2 grown-up children, twins who were 2 years older than me. We moved to their house, which was this large and expensive-looking mansion with a lot of rooms, with tons of artifacts for decor that only rich people have in their house. You would think my life would become better now that I'm living in wealth, but it was the exact opposite, and every day I wished that I had gone with my dad instead. My mother was negligent to the point that sometimes we wouldn't see for days and she would probably forget that she had a daughter. All she cared about was going to elite events with her husband, wearing expensive clothes and just swimming in money. It was only about the money. Meanwhile, I was approaching my sophomore years in high school as this awkward and lonely girl with no real friends, who got bullied constantly and was suffering from depression and anorexia nervosa, and it was so obvious, but somehow no one, not even my mother, saw this. Life with my step-siblings wasn't good either. My stepsister, Jane, took pleasure in humiliating me and constantly reminding me that I'm not of their class and my mother is just another gold-digging hoe. She would trip me, push me, shove me, and when I tried to complain my mother would take her side and shush me. "What are you trying to do? You want to end this good life for us?" That's what she always said, when she's the one with the good life. My stepbrother, Jake, didn't really do much to me. He mostly ignored me like I didn't exist, which I was grateful for, but none of them cared. The only person who cared that I regret ever listening to was my stepfather's brother. I'll call him Isaac. Isaac was this always smiling typical playboy who was oddly interested in me for some reason. He would come around often, try to sit with me, talk to me, and it was really uncomfortable. He promised that he cared about my well-being and he was going to talk to my mother about my eating disorder and what I was going through. It was that promise that kept me close to him because I really needed help when my mother was ignoring me. She believed that as long as I got allowances she gave me every month, I would be okay. I was in the 12th grade when my mother and her husband celebrated their 5-year anniversary at the house. By that time, Jane and Jake were at Cambridge already, and they weren't home since it was in the middle of the semester. This meant I was the only kid in that house. It was that day that Isaac lured me to a guest room on the pretense of wanting to talk to me about how I was doing, and then he essayed me. I honestly don't remember what happened. It was mostly a blur. Several times he did it to me and left me there as I slipped into unconsciousness from the shock. When I woke up, I was in my room and my mother was sitting next to me, looking at me with a slightly worried expression that I've never seen from her before. She knew, I know she knew what happened because she changed my clothes and asked if I was okay. That moment I cried and threw myself in her arms and told her everything. She patted my head and told me it would be fine, then reached behind her and brought out a new dress and told me to hurry up and wear it so we could go outside for a family photo. My stepfather was waiting. I couldn't believe what she said to me or how she was acting. I had just gotten SA'd and she was more worried about keeping face than my health. I tried to struggle but I was too weak. She made me wear the dress and go downstairs to take the pictures with them. Throughout the whole ordeal, I was crying and my mom was constantly telling me to smile, clean the tears and look normal. The aching between my legs made them wobble as I tried to stand, everything hurt and I felt like I was going to fall soon. My mother was there, even standing with Isaac and faking smiles around. There were a lot of people and it was like a huge event. Soon it was time for me to give a speech for my parents, and immediately as I stepped on that stage, my eyes caught Isaac's smiling ones and I just let go. I screamed about what happened to me, about me being SA'd and about my mother not even caring enough. I was going to go all out to everyone there if I had not been pulled away by the help and then by my mother and dragged into the house. Immediately we were out of sight. She slapped me. Right across the face. She yelled that I didn't know what I had done. She kept talking about what people would say. The thing she kept saying the most was about her husband and how she didn't want him to get upset. I honestly could not believe my mother was acting this way. As she scolded me, my stepfather walked in angrily and grabbed me by the front of my dress. When I tell you that this man beat me, he beat me up in front of my mother and she just looked away. He punched and slapped, and after I had bruises all over me, he told me to pack my bags and get out. He said I was a lying and manipulative bitch, who was never content with the good life and was looking for a way to bring him down by using his innocent brother. That evening, after everyone left, I was kicked out. I was homeless and went from shelter to shelter just to be able to rest my head and get something to eat. I barely managed to graduate from high school, but I did. My mother had my phone number but she never called, not even once. After weeks, I got a job at a fast food joint and managed to save enough for registration fees to apply to colleges. My coworkers and boss were kind to me and offered a little support, and I was allowed to sleep in the back room of the fast food joint after I almost got assaulted again at the shelter and made it out with a black eye. I studied hard and took extra jobs just to survive, and luckily for me, I got accepted into the University of Chicago on a full scholarship grant and financial aid. I took all I had and bought a flight ticket to get there. It was hard but I managed. When I got there, I took on campus jobs to be able to keep myself and was managing quite well. I tried to forget about my past, my mother, and about everything I had gone through and focused on building myself. I went to the free therapy classes and it was good for me. I even began the journey of tackling my eating disorder, little by little. It was during my last semester as a sophomore that I ran into Jake. It was a surprise especially for him. He did not expect to see me there and invited me for coffee. Strange, but I agreed. It had been 3 years since and he heard what had happened when he went home last, and he was very sorry that I went through that. I couldn't believe that he wasn't on his father's side. I guess Jake wasn't that bad of a person anyway. Jake told me a lot of things. He told me how his sister got into an accident during the past year and had been confined to a hospital ever since, in a wheelchair. He said his father's business is depleting and he had gotten divorced from my mother. He also told me that he had left that family for good after graduating and was starting his life here in Chicago. The only person he would keep contact with is his sister. I couldn't believe it, honestly. All this happening. Jake apologized a lot for everything and believe me, I held no grudge against him. He took my phone number and we agreed to have lunch in a few days. When the time came, we had lunch but we were not alone. Jake had brought his friend, Thomas, a year older than me along. Thomas was a practicing psychologist and Jake had asked him to help me with free therapy sessions so I can tackle my disorder and trauma once and for all. In this way, I began to see Jake as a brother. We had both matured and I was grateful for his help. I had also become really close to Thomas and soon enough we began dating. Jane, my stepsister, passed away sadly after a few months of struggling. I couldn't attend the funeral because I didn't want to see anyone from that family, including my mother, and Jake understood. I worked hard at school and graduated with a degree in finance. It was then that Thomas proposed to me and I accepted. We got married soon after and Jake was the best man. His own fiancée, a very lovely girl, was my bridesmaid. As a wedding present, Thomas did the unimaginable. He managed to track down my father and flew him in from France for the reception. I couldn't believe it. I was in tears that day, and I hugged him harder than I ever could when I saw him. Turns out he had been trying to reach me all these years but my mother did not allow it. I got to meet his family and his lovely wife. I was happy and content after so many years and was glad for all the good people in my life. Thomas and I bought a house close to Jake and he and his fiancée helped set up. It only took a few days and soon it was done. One of those days, Thomas and Jake went to town and I was left alone at home with Jake's fiancée. I was a few months pregnant at this time and she insisted on helping around the house. We were both in the kitchen when the doorbell rang and I went to go check it. Right before me, looking extremely disheveled, was my mother. I was shocked and could not talk for a few minutes. I couldn't believe this. She tried to hug me but I moved away from her. The anger of all the years returned to me as I stared at her. She sobbed at my doorstep and begged me to forgive her, telling me how her husband divorced her and she got kicked out with nothing and she's been struggling since and she was homeless and had nowhere to go, until she heard I was doing well and looked for me. Not once did this woman try to apologize for everything she did to me and let happen to me. She was as selfish as usual and only came because she needed something. When she asked to stay at my house, I laughed hard. She was shameless, she was selfish. I told her everything I had in my mind, that I am glad karma has caught up with her and her husband and soon enough, Isaac. I told her she was not part of my life that only included my husband, our unborn child, my brother and his soon-to-be wife and my father. She was just a stranger that I wanted to leave my property immediately. Can you believe she tried to turn it around and call me an ungrateful daughter? When she refused to leave, I called the police and watched them drag her away, far away from me.